Okay, we are ready to listen to your presentation. Please. Okay.
Do you see the presentation?
Yes. Yeah, okay.
And you also hear and see me reasonably well, so okay. I don't hear you quite well, but I assume everything is okay. Otherwise, let me know. Write me a message in the chat or something. So remotely, hello. Very sorry to not be able to be with you. I would have much preferred that, but yeah, sometimes it's not possible. Great to have the opportunity to be in contact and in exchange with you, nonetheless online. So unless you stop me now, I would just start with my presentation, which deals with AI ecosystems and theory of harm and such things. So maybe at first a very brief word. Don't worry, the slides are a bit packed because they reflect a nascent paper, but I shall gloss over a couple details. I think we all have an intuitive
Sorry, Professor Picht, could you increase the dimension of the slide? Because I think the audience cannot see your text. We can see you and both you and the text, but it is not possible to.
Is it too small?
To read, yeah. Sorry to interrupt you.
Better now?
Okay, sorry, it is a technical problem of our. Okay, perfect. Yeah, okay, thank you. Vedete? Okay. Please, go on.
Does it work now?
Yes.
Emanuela, does it work now?
Yes, we're trying to make it even bigger, but I'm not sure how to.
Does it help when I go in full screen mode like that?
Yeah, it could be help. The audience in order to see the text. Oh, perfect. Many thanks.
Okay. So now I don't see you anymore, but so I assume it's better now. Otherwise, tell me again. So I don't see you anymore. So let me know if anything is amiss.
We hear you very well and we see the slides very well.
Okay, that's cool. So intuitive feeling we all have on what a digital ecosystem basically is. A couple of typical traits from the mostly econ literature here on the slide. I would like to point out that today most ecosystems we see in the market are both a multiple party and a multiple service ecosystem. And the services, they can be complementary, but they can also be substitutes. So being in competition for users. So that's one layer of what we call cooperation and competition at the same time. And they are modular in the sense that it's not one fixed value chain with a fixed scope, but that the ecosystem is expandable. New actors, new players, and also new services can be brought in and are being brought in regularly. There are many types of ecosystems, of course. The type I have in view for this topic is the ecosystem in sort of the middle of which you have a strong host, typically the controller of a digital platform around which additional services group. And that host exercises governance in many ways. It exercises technical governance via APIs, for example, or certain technical standards. it exercises business governance, sort of setting the general business model, but also co-deciding on how profits are being shared. And it sets a governance in other ways, for example, enforcement dispute resolution. The host typically is also in co-opetition with the service providers. On the one hand, it closely cooperates with them to generate the value, the joint value. On the other hand, it is a competitor to the extent it runs services which also certain other players in the ecosystem run. An ecosystem, and that brings me already to my second slide, they are value generating, they're attractive, and what this slide does, or the gist of that slide, if you will, is the finding that when we look at economic literature and what it says on why companies engage in ecosystem building, why they do this, and when we then sort of reflect on what those economic research parameters or findings do when we add AI to the picture, then sort of the thesis or the finding is that integrating AI into digital ecosystems increases the incentive to engage in ecosystem building. So with the advent of AI, ecosystems are becoming more attractive to market players, and there is an additional incentive to do them. To pick just maybe 3 examples from the slide, one established reason from econ literature for why ecosystems are being built is the ability to do competency transfer, especially on the technological side. Now, when we think about non-AI versus AI ecosystems, then we see that by now, the technology underlying traditional platforms and more traditional ecosystems is fairly widespread, right? So this is a technology which all major players basically have available. But AI is different. That's a new kid on the block, a new technology, not easily accessible to all players in the digital markets. So here, competency transfer becomes more attractive. Equally, one reason for digital ecosystems to arise is that they are better at coordinating innovation processes than companies standalone. It is easier to make all companies, the services of which are in principle interoperable, walk in the same innovation direction when you have them in an ecosystem, as opposed to having them sort of standalone and then just working with APIs. Now, this general factor is also intensified when we add AI to the picture, because as we all know, currently the AI developments are moving so fast that the ability to well coordinate the interoperability of services that sort of have AI as a joint layer becomes even more attractive. Or also, digital platforms, even non-AI, or digital ecosystems, even non-AI ones, they tend to assume sort of a gateway role. I will also call that good shepherd role on a later slide. For customers, it can be complex to somehow find and combine all the digital services in a way that gives them sort of the optimal user experience. Now, the ecosystem does that job for the user. It's sort of a one-stop shop. This general factor driving ecosystem building also becomes more intense when we add AI to the picture, because AI is a technology which is being perceived as complex by users. It's something we like to play around with on the internet and doing funny pictures and creating texts more or less convincing. But when it comes to really integrating AI into our work processes or exposing, for example, sensitive personal data to AI, then we become much more hesitant, and then we appreciate a well-established player with which, for example, we have already been in a long-standing contact as the gateway, as the good shepherd through this new and fascinating but also a bit frightening field. As you know, economic literature also uses the saliency bias picture or paradigm for this. So once things get complex and partly threatening, we tend to go to guys we already know and which are quite visible. So based on the economic literature regarding non-AI ecosystems, the assumption is that ecosystem building gets more intense in an AI world. And there is empirical evidence for that. I don't think I have to dwell much on this. You're all aware of major AI ecosystems we see around us. This is just as an example, one of the two major Microsoft ecosystems. This is, if you will, this is the user-facing ecosystem where, for example, the Microsoft 365 apps are being integrated with the Microsoft Copilot, so the main user-facing AI tool that Microsoft has. But we should not forget that Microsoft has also a very important further ecosystem, which is developer-facing, meaning that here Azure and the Power Platform are tools that help developers using AI for their tasks and their business model. So sort of two distinct, though interrelated ecosystems Microsoft runs here. And of course, we all know that Google has Gemini and Amazon has Q and Meta has Llama. And there could be further examples I could give here. So empirical, yes?
Sorry, we don't see your slides moving. Okay. Wasn't sure. Okay.
Did you see that one?
Yeah, now we see it.
Okay. So I go on large again, or do I stick with that one?
No, that's okay.
Okay. So there could be further examples of AI ecosystems, of course. Now, next step. This slide basically says something which is complex in its details, but fairly evident, I think, in its gist. Namely, these new technologies can be very cool, but they also have downsides, right? They can be dangerous to competition, but they can also be very beneficial for static and dynamic efficiency. Again, let me work with one or two examples. Something that more traditional digital ecosystems could not do is that they worked on the basis of native language prompts to generate complex content, right? So I talk to my voice assistant and out comes a very nice Excel sheet with pictures attached that personally I'm not a very good Excel user, could never generate. That's something which is new and cool, but which also tends to make me more dependent on the whatever service provider that is the interface between me and those data and software and whatever it takes to provide me with that lovely Excel sheet and presentation. Equally, traditional digital platforms could also profile users and thereby, for example, generate targeted advertisements or targeted offers. But arguably, the AI systems, with their ability to detect conduct patterns and their ability to sort of be watchful all the time and create action proposals based on detected use and conduct patterns, brings this profiling and targeting to a new level. This can be very cool because I get more precisely what I want to need, but it can evidently also make me vulnerable to manipulative conduct. For example, demand creation. I'm nudged so successfully that in the end I will have a demand I wasn't aware of before. Or also, one of the key competencies of AI, self-learning, is of course something wonderful. One of the main innovation drivers in AI systems, but at the same time, the self-learning capacity can tend to widen existing gaps between very strong market players and weaker market players, right? So upsides and downsides. It is cool, but it can also be quite dangerous to competition. This is a slide I shall also just, gloss over a bit. When we try to systemize the existing competition risks into the established grid of anti-competitive practices, then those practices here on the slide are probably among the important candidates, so to speak. It's not all the abuses or problematic merger behavior that there can be, but those are certainly candidates we should have in view regarding ecosystems in general, but also AI ecosystems. I would just like to highlight two things. First, when we think about exclusion more generally, it is important to well distinguish the competitive situation within the ecosystem, so where several service providers compete against one another and the host partly competes with the service providers, so competitive relationship, there we can have abusive conduct. Then there is the competitive relationship between entire ecosystems, where one ecosystem may try to exclude another one. This is sometimes in the economic literature, this is sometimes being called ecosystem envelopment. This is a facet. And then we have a dimension which I believe has been a bit overlooked so far, that there is also sort of a competition between ecosystems and remaining standalone service providers. You can have, for example, a well-integrated PDF software in your ecosystem, but there are also standalone software providers you could use. And there is also a competitive relationship where, of course, exclusion can take place. So that's one thing I would like to point out. And then the second thing I would like to highlight is in the mergers area here. Of course, killer acquisitions have been around well before AI became part of ecosystems. That's, in that sense, not something new. It's something that is still a problem, but it's not new. However, something we see more markedly right now is this sort of close to merger, non-acquire cooperation situation. Personally, I don't have a very good theory or explanation for why this has become so conspicuous right now. One element of it I may touch upon later on, but it is certainly a fact that those, sometimes it's being called reverse acqui-hires, those sort of corporations which are strongly based on licensees, but also on a cooperation like the one I showed you before. I quickly jump back. This one here, right, where Microsoft says to the developers, take my basic AI tools, take my servers, take my calculating power, take everything, possibly just pay at cost. So don't really only pay what providing these services cost to Microsoft, energy costs and so on, but you have to share whatever innovation you generate on my platforms there. Yeah. So this is sort of a phenomenon which is at the moment particular, I would say, to those AI ecosystems. Okay, so that's sort of a descriptive econ background context. Now, when we look at how legal rules, and I focus here mainly on EU competition law, when we look at how legal rules address this relatively evident phenomenon of partly novel, partly changing risks to competition, it's actually quite surprising. And we see from the legal situation how swift this AI development really was. The market definition mentions ecosystems in one single paragraph and mainly as a sort of aftermarket setting, and in any case, very much based on traditional market delineation. In the draft guidelines on exclusionary abuse by the European Commission, I couldn't find the word ecosystems one single time. The merger guidelines don't say anything on ecosystems really. And as we all know, the DMA doesn't have AI as a core platform service, but also from a structural perspective, it is relatively non-ecosystem as it focuses on individual core platform services, not on bundles of core platform services, on ecosystem, right? And I could also, but I'm not going to talk really about that. There are member state provisions, of course, which also are relevant in this field. For example, the 19A of the German Competition Act, which is a bit more promising actually than what the EU has to offer on the union level right now. But also there is no explicit language on ecosystems. So the written law, the statutory law, seems relatively poor in what it has to offer regarding ecosystems. When we look at case law, it doesn't look much better. I could highlight more cases here. I limited it to Google Fitbit. As you all know, there is certainly an ecosystem dimension to this case, but it really didn't play a role in the reasons underlying the Commission decision. In Booking Travel, this is different. Their ecosystem figures prominently, but when we take a closer look at the decision, what we see is a little bit worrying as well. It is not even clear whether the Commission tackles this merger as a creation of ecosystem scenario or as an extension of ecosystem scenario, because the Commission doesn't seem to have a very clear notion of when we can speak of an ecosystem. The main theory which the Commission applies to somehow get to grips with that case is that of a reverse leveraging. So Booking acquires the business of eTraveli to leverage from that business into its sort of established booking business in the market where it is dominant, right? Upon criticisms by the companies, the Commission itself admits that this reverse leveraging theory has no basis whatsoever in the current merger guidelines. The dogmatic sort of basis the Commission tries to come up with then is quite weak. It's a sort of analogy to the non-horizontal merger guidelines in a broad sense. So that is one thing. Then we must see that this reverse leveraging theory is really not a real ecosystem theory. It is a very traditional sort of binary theory, one service and the other being bundled, being combined, being leveraged from one to the other. But the reverse leveraging theory in itself is no ecosystem theory. Does the decision speak about ecosystems? Yes, a lot, but in a very, I would say, sweeping and not very balanced manner. There are several passages in the decision which almost sound like the sheer fact that there is an ecosystem and that booking does something which sort of enhances the ecosystem would be as such enough to justify merger intervention, merger law intervention. And this, when we think about the advantages, the innovation potential, the static efficiency potential of ecosystems, this is certainly a dangerous approach to say whenever something is being done with ecosystems, competition enforcement should intervene. All of this brings me to 4 theses. Let me start from that angle. I had a discussion recently with Nicolas Petit in Florence at the EUI, where he said, well, you know, with the ecosystems, I fear the hype. I fear that this becomes the new catchword and everybody writes hundreds of pages on how we need to crack down on ecosystems. And this is quite dangerous, he said, because this is going to hamper once more innovation and business success growth in Europe. And I said, I see your point, and I think you're completely right on the hype thing, but I think the conclusion cannot be that we do nothing. Because as I have tried to show, ecosystems are already on the case law table, and adding AI to the picture makes it even more likely that case law will have to deal with ecosystems in the time to come. Now, I would much rather have us think about a balanced theory of harm, a well-balanced approach to how to deal with those ecosystems beforehand, than being in denial, and then at one point, the authorities, when they have to decide ecosystem cases, coming up with some sort of makeshift ad hoc approach, and then having to tackle many cases until a reasonable approach works out. So this is why I think, even though I'm completely supportive that we shouldn't, of the fact that we shouldn't engage in an ecosystem enforcement type, I think we still need to think about what the theory of harm should be, because there can be competitive harm. I think this is fairly certain, and what our criteria should be. Now, I, of course, don't have sort of the solution to this, far from it. My humble contribution to this discussion, which I hope intensifies now, is the thought of plus factors. Meaning that we should identify ecosystem settings, and when we see there is an ecosystem setting, we should think about which are the components that turn something that is beneficial in principle into something that we should be cautious with, into something where competition enforcement might step in, right? What are the parameters that turn beneficial ecosystem building conduct into something that justifies competition law control and possibly intervention? Now, I'm not going to assume or I'm not going to give you a complete list of potential plus factors, and I really don't have it. So those are just thoughts. First factor thought is that it's almost like a negative factor, and I think it's fairly easy to agree on that one. A per se prohibition of ecosystem enhancement would be crazy. Right? So we cannot say, oh, this is something that enhances your ecosystem, so this is in conflict with competition law. Equally, I think, and this goes in the hype direction, I think there is a certain danger now that we cloak anti-competitive or potentially anti-competitive conduct, well known for a long time, into sort of an ecosystem theory of harm and do fancy things with this. I think this is dangerous when we face conduct that is essentially a single bundling two products conduct, or that is essentially killer acquisition of a single technology, for example. So traditional forms of harm or of harmful merger conduct, then we should tackle this with the established theories of harm and the established rules, and we shouldn't try to label everything as ecosystem and create new theories for that. But there are settings where the traditional sort of single service theories of harm and conduct rules probably don't work so well. And there we need to think about ecosystem-specific plus factors. On that part of the slide, you see a selection of plus factors, of things I would think are plus factors, which are equally applicable to AI and non-AI ecosystems, right? So this is not AI specific. Regardless of whether there is an AI present in the ecosystem, we have to think about what I call host power here. So the extent of the strength of the host in the middle of the ecosystem, the measures it takes and the opportunities it has to strongly control the ecosystem in an anti-competitive measure. So for example, where the host designs its APIs in a way that prevents companies or service providers within the ecosystem to interact well with other ecosystems, because they have to invest, for example, so much in the unique APIs of that host's ecosystems that they have difficulties interacting with other ecosystems. This could be something which creates particular competitive risk, but it is not something that is AI specific. We can have that in more traditional digital ecosystems as well. Or also where we see that a strong host in an ecosystem either builds or buys a new service to run itself in the ecosystem that is not something that just develops its current range of services, but that is something really distinct, something really new, such as booking, trying to buy hotel services from eTravel. This could also something that justifies increased competitive worries, but that is not something that is AI specific. So therefore, let me go to my next, and I think already, well, I'm getting to the end anyway, to my next slide. I think this is something where we should discuss and where much more thought is necessary. What are factors that are truly ecosystem specific? It's not so easy, actually. I think that something that intuitively, directly comes to one's mind is the essential facilities thing, right? So control over one powerful AI tool, AI system that operates as the essential facility in such an ecosystem. This may be a plus factor, but personally, I am interested to hear your views afterwards. Personally, I'm not so sure whether AI ecosystems will bring us a lot of those classical digital bracket, essential facilities cases. Because when we look at, for example, the approach Meta is taking with its Llama models, then we see that there's a lot of open source going on. We also see that several digital ecosystems operate on the basis of the same or very similar large language models. So I'm not sure whether AI, at least at the LLM level, really will be that bottleneck essential facilities technology in many cases. It can certainly happen. I'm not so sure. One thing that I would like to point out, however, is the ability to steer co-innovation, command and order and direct co-innovation in the ecosystem. I think that this is, at least for the time being, an important factor, because we are really in a new race with a new technology. So there is a new innovation a new period of very strong innovation going on right now. In the ability to control where the innovation goes via your ecosystem and your host position in that ecosystem, of course, gives you prime opportunities to have the innovation work towards your business models. Right? So this is something I think that AI adds to the picture and that we should be watchful of. Of course, measures that foster the ability to steer co-innovation in an AI digital ecosystems can take many forms. I gave just some examples here. R&D governance, for example, so engaging in contracts, for example, on R&D cooperation. Then we once more the R&D hosting thing, as we see in the Microsoft developers ecosystem. This is certainly a way to steer, but possibly also managing that ecosystem service providers pre-install small AI systems on their devices, and those AI systems are somehow connected to the host, controllable by the host. This is also certainly a supreme way to control co-innovation. So I think this is a relatively AI-specific plus factor. Next thing are the data feedback loops. Now, evidently, data and data control is something we've been talking about a long time in the digital sphere. And I have heard from a couple of colleagues, oh, well, you know, the data thing, we had it before. That's nothing that is AI specific. I agree, but only to a certain extent. When you think, to speak by way of an example, when you think about the Microsoft Copilot, where you can tell the Copilot, please prepare a presentation for a board meeting, for example, drawing on all presentations, PowerPoint presentations we have been doing over the past 10 years, drawing on all contracts we have concluded with customers over the past 10 years, and then please adapt said presentation to the personal style to my personal style, because I have been creating presentations with the Copilot for, say, a year now. And then the result is like one user-specific presentation drawing on partly confidential and in any case cross-app data. This is something we have not been seeing before in traditional ecosystems. This is a level of data combination and also feedback loops which is novel. And creating or measures that strengthen those feedback loops, and in particular that strengthen an exclusive position in generating and profiting from such feedback loops, I think this is something AI specific. We must also, to stay a moment longer with the example, we must also not forget that it is not so easy for companies to share their confidential data with several service providers. I have to ask my customers whether our confidential contracts can be shared not only with Microsoft, but also with Meta's Llama and Google's Gemini and so on, right? So this factor alone enables or is potentially the basis for a control position. So those, and then another important point is the adaptation to user preferences. When you think about DeepL, important, cool digital technology, but a bit pre-AI. When you had a text translated by DeepL, what did you do? You copy-pasted the text into, for example, a Word document or a Google Doc, and then you adapted the text, redacted it, whatnot. And DeepL didn't take notice, couldn't take notice, because you took it out of the DeepL framework and into a different digital environment. Now, with the Microsoft digital ecosystem, the Copilot sees whatever you do with the text it has generated. So it learns with each and every edit, each and every step we take. This is a powerful way in which these feedback loops work. So again, this type of AI-specific feedback loops is something I think that is AI ecosystem specific and potentially a plus factor. And just to mention it, tacit collusion, we discussed it so much with more traditional algorithms. Is it really new? Not quite sure, but I think when we see how independent and developing self-learning these AI tools act and interact, I think we might also reach in the area of tacit collusion a new level and thereby new potentials of anti-competitive conduct. So it may be that fostering tacit collusion in an AI ecosystem should be a plus factor, and it may even be that AI finally really changes the way we think about tacit collusion and the competition law rules towards tacit collusion. So those are just examples, and I don't think I'm aware of all AI-specific plus factors, certainly not, but I think this is the direction in which we should discuss and in which we should research in order to have something balanced, pro-competitive, ready as the AI ecosystem cases hit the tables of courts and enforcers. Many thanks. Yeah, no, that's the last. Do I still have 2 minutes or should I stop?
Maybe you have 2 minutes, just 2 minutes.
Well, very briefly, if we think that we should do something here, we need to do it across EU competition law. We certainly need specific sections in the merger guidelines. I don't think we need to change 102 TFEU. At the outset, at least, the ecosystem theories of harm and conducts are more something for the general clause, so no need to change something here. But we certainly need to do something with secondary and tertiary law. I think also in AI ecosystems, the market definition notice needs to be much more creative when it comes to look at market spheres instead of traditional narrowly delimited markets. And I also think the draft guidelines on exclusionary abuse should ultimately include language on ecosystems. I think the categories are there. You all know the draft guidelines quite well. So you know that there is that category of no merits assessment, which is not based on existing case law or evident harmful conduct, but which is based really on case-by-case assessment. I think this is the initial category we should choose for such ecosystem conduct, but there needs to be language in the guidelines that ecosystems are something we should look into. As to the DMA, personally, I think others are not with me on that, but personally, I don't think we should already introduce conduct obligations regarding ecosystems. I think this is too early. We need to learn more, but we should certainly make sure that the DMA can capture AI involving tools, software tools, such as, for example, the Copilot as core platform services. I'm not entirely sure we need to change much in the language of the DMA, but we should, if it takes that, we should change it because we need to be able to capture those AI involving services. So that's what I have to offer, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much for the patience, especially as it was remote. I know that's tougher to follow. Thanks a lot.